With Wuthering Waves 2.5 story coming to an end, it has also began a massive discussion in the community, debating over the moral and philosophical message behind Rover and Phrolova's character and choices. It also left a massive hole in the community, emotionally. So what was the point of the story? Is Rover right? Is Phrolova wrong? Are neither right or wrong? These are what I'll be discussing in this video. Now, I did enjoy the story. I would honestly give it a 9.5 out of 10. I feel like it was one of, if not the best, written stories of Wuthering Waves. It is definitely different from what we're used to. You know, we're used to very streamlined story plot lines like, okay, we have a problem, we fix it, gather wives along the way. But the story, while it did conclude, it left us a message that was open-ended, which led to the moral debate, within the community about the philosophical message behind it. It left a lot of people dissatisfied, which I think maybe that's the point. Because it was left up to our own interpretation, there is no definitive answer. It is based on our perspective on, Rover and Phrolova's characters and choices. Now, I did share a similar feeling from films such as Inception, Memento, and Gone Girl. Now, I'm not comparing these critically acclaimed films to a story of Wuthering Waves. I'm just saying that it gave me a similar feeling because I do believe the purpose of these stories was to provoke thought and spark discussions. And with that, I think the Wuthering Waves 2.5 story did a good job. Now with that, I want to talk about Rover first before we talk about Phrolova. Now, Rover is the protagonist that we are following ever since 1.0. He's mostly a self-insert character. We're just putting ourselves in him, and it reflects on our choices in the dialogues that we choose. But we do know that his ultimate goal is to stop the lament and save people. But he has failed countless times, and which is why he wipes his memories to gain new perspectives, which I honestly find to be ironic. But I think that's a good thing because Kuro is shifting the narrative of what a main character can be within the gacha space. Their character is starting to show, and they're not as linear as we thought they were. They're not as empty as we thought they were. They have their own thoughts, opinions, and judgment, which did reflect in the argument with Phrolova. While it did reflect more of the character, it also exposed them to being flawed and being tunnel visioned for the greater good. And I believe that this sudden addition to this character caused people to feel uncomfortable. It rubbed people the wrong way because it was a very strong, judgment and opinion that Rover had. Now, I do believe Rover is still a good person, but now we know their means, and it is to save people and stop the lament by any means necessary, which, kind of now includes killing those who oppose them or actively promote or use the lament, which I believe is one of the many reasons why Rover lacked the remorse when they realized that they probably killed Phrolova. Again, I still believe that Rover is a good person with the goal for the greater good, but I'm not sure if they can still be considered as the good guys. At least that kind of depends on your perspective on things. What's not up for consideration is that Rover is not a person of integrity, or at least does not have a strong moral compass when it comes to the greater good. Which I think is a good thing because it adds depth to their character and room for character development in later, patches that come along. Now, we don't know majority of his past, it is still unknown, but we do know, some clues of his past lives through the Black Shores and the clues that he has found along the way in his journey, in their journey. And hopefully we get to see more of that and him, building up his character and realizing the things that he has done wrong and hopefully becoming a better person. Now let's move on to Phrolova. Phrolova is the antagonist, and we've been known that since 1.0. She is a villain with the Fraxidus. And I hope that people don't forget that she has committed genocide and conducted human experiments. Only now we know her reasonings, And we know how much she has suffered and continues to suffer through hundreds, if not thousands of years. But this does not justify her actions and methods when she was trying to research ways to bring her loved ones, her deceased, back to life. I think it was also in the story where it showed that when she was containing these frequencies in her sonoro, that they were also suffering because they weren't able to move on. I'm not sure, but it's probably along those lines, but that's what I remember. Now, even the concept of reviving somebody goes against the meaning of life itself, which Rover was trying to tell Phrolova. However, I do believe Rover was not the right person to say this because I don't think they fully understand what life means as well, because they can just start over. They wipe the memories clean, and this is what Phrolova was trying to point out, trying to call Rover out for, which is because you can start over, you just toss away the irreplaceable relationships you have with people and the emotions that you have built up with them along the way. You just cast that aside and start anew. And I side with Phrolova with this. What I don't really side with her is her grudge against Rover. I think it was unfair to pin the blame of her madness all on Rover, while I do understand that because they were able to grasp the true meaning and essence behind her composition and made a promise to her, it filled her with hope. And I can understand how devastating that was to her when it turns out that she was forgotten for thousands of years, which eventually led to her wanting to partner with the Fraxides in order to attain her goal, and she did not care if she was being used or her using them. I can fully understand her, but that does not mean that I will agree with her and her methods, and I feel like people should, understand that. But yeah, as tragic as her story was and how it ended, I'm glad that it ended sort of in a happy note for her. She was able to find the missing piece to her composition, and thus she fulfilled her promise to Rover. And later in the end, Rover fulfilled his promise by going back in the sonoro and finally listening to the entire composition. Again, I do believe that the story behind her and the story of how it ended for her was tragic, but I am glad that she was able to reunite with her deceased loved ones, whether or not it was just her frequency and their frequency alone. Now that we're done with talking about Rover and Phrolova individually, are they right or wrong? Is Rover right? Is Phrolova wrong? Are they neither right or wrong? It's another case of just because you're correct doesn't mean you're right kind of thing. It's all a matter of perspective. At least that's what I believe the true purpose of the story was. And it reflected in an ironic parallel between Rover and Phrolova. Both of them lacked the understanding and perspective of each other's suffering and reasoning of doing what they're doing, which led them to be hypocrites. I do believe both of them are hypocrites in their own way. Rover is driven by the logic and the greater good, while Phrolova is driven by emotion and attachment to her deceased ones. And when those ideologies and beliefs clash because they're opposite, it would end their cooperation, and thus leading them to fight, and thus leading Rover to, kill Phrolova. Now let's talk about, the rest of the story. At first, it did feel like it was just a companion quest with Phrolova, but as the story continued, as we know how it is linked to the Dark Tide and whatnot, that's when the story started picking up for me, and that's when it really felt like a main story quest. And the writing was just phenomenal, to be honest. I was hooked until the very end, and when it ended with Rover finding the sonoro of Phrolova, I was just like, what? Like it ended there. And then Carlotta was like messaging us, and I was like, dude, I am trying to process what the fuck just happened. I am mourning that Phrolova is dead. Kuro finally did it. They finally, broke the notion of that you cannot kill off a character because they're going to be playable, or how a villain has to become a good person, a change of heart, become a playable character. They broke that. Well, at least I thought they did, until we moved further along into the sonoro and realized that Phrolova is still alive. I do think that her body is dead, but her frequency just merged with the sonoro, and thus that she is quote unquote alive in Abby's words. So yeah, that's what I thought about the story. I'm very excited to where this will lead to. I'm very excited for Augusta and Yuno. I haven't seen their, leaks, well, official leaks, but I'm very excited. I definitely want to try to get both of them. And I do hope that this story that we had with Frolova links up with whatever the ending was when we were talking with Fenrico. And hopefully everything comes together and we have an amazing conclusion to this story. I do believe it's gonna end in 2.6. If not, it'll probably lead to 2.7. But yeah, that's the end of my analysis. And hopefully we have a very respectful, well-mannered discussion in the comments. And yeah, overall, I just really enjoyed the story. I love this writing. It was different from what we're used to, but that's what I like about it. It was different. That's about it. As always, I do appreciate you guys to like and subscribe to my channel. More Wuthering Waves content is coming along, and I hope you guys stick around. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.